What's up, everybody? John the Morgile here. Going to do a quick video response to one of the most ridiculous globe Earth claims that seems to be very popular of late because, of course, the flat Earth arguments are getting more and more well known, and so globe Earthers have to continue to paint themselves into a corner with just absolutely ridiculous hypotheticals in order to continue their paradigm. And it really seems to me that the ones making this claim are being extremely disingenuous and not actually believe what they're preaching, but they're doing more of like a damage control to keep people that may be on the fence about the globe from possibly waking up, if at all possible. So what we're talking about specifically is one of the biggest proofs against the globe, I think, and has always been a big one for me, is the fact that in the globe Earth theory, you have infinite space, which is supposedly a near perfect vacuum, adjacent to the pressurized atmosphere of the Earth. And of course, in reality, you can't have a pressurized environment adjacent to a negative pressure environment or a vacuum, and certainly not an extremely powerful vacuum such as the hypothetical infinite space. And so this poses a huge problem for the globe Earth theory, and in fact, in my opinion, is sufficient. If you don't know anything else about flat Earth, if you know this one thing, it's sufficient to completely debunk the globe Earth theory, in fact. But what the globe Earth trolls say is that because we have a pressure gradient in the atmosphere, so like there's higher pressure towards the ground at, say, the base of a mountain compared to at the top of the mountain, or a plane that's sitting on the ground is in a higher pressure environment than a plane that's at 30,000 feet. Same thing goes for a weather balloon, whatever. You can give lots of examples of how there is certainly a pressure gradient in reality. Now, what the globe earthers say is that because we have gravity, this allows for a pressure gradient, and they'll sort of flip the script and they'll say, how does the flat Earth explain this pressure gradient? And furthermore, this pressure gradient, the fact that it exists, somehow debunks the claim that you can't have a low pressure environment adjacent to a high pressure environment without something solid separating the two. Now, this is just completely absurd because not only will they say that this fact proves gravity, but it also throws a wrench into flat Earth's theory, in air quotes. And it doesn't do either of these things. What this shows is that there's a fundamental difference between up and down, and all things, including the fluid-like gases of the Earth, want to tend towards the ground. Now, what this does is this natural tendency for all things towards the ground, first of all, it doesn't prove gravity. The fact that you need something like gravity in your theory doesn't prove gravity. Now, whatever the actual cause of this tendency is irrelevant. It could be something like the static electric charge of the Earth. It's probably electromagnetic. Has nothing to do with the theory of gravity, which is essentially the spherical Earth warping the fabric of space-time to create gravity. That's what is claimed here by the globe earthers, of course. But the fact that you have a pressure gradient in natural reality does not prove the theory of gravity, like they purport that it does. So, like, globe earthers will say if you have a vacuum chamber and gas is released into that vacuum chamber, that the gas will expand and the pressure will be even on all sides of the vacuum chamber. And that may be true, but there is definitely a tendency for down to be down and up to be up in reality. And in such a small enclosed little vacuum chamber, you don't have enough room for that natural gradient to take place. Now, certainly you do have lower density gases which find their way up above the higher density gases, But within, say, the troposphere, you just simply have less and less stuff above you the higher you go up, and so the pressure decreases. Again, this doesn't prove gravity, it proves that we have a pressure gradient, but the fact remains that just having pressure here on the ground in reality debunks the notion that space is an infinite vacuum. Uh, Now, there's all sorts of other things about the Earth, not having curvature, not having any motion, that are just clear and obvious to anyone who's looked at this objectively for long enough as a rational adult. But we've all, been brainwashed into believing this other theoretical thing of a spherical Earth in infinite space. And again, you've got the globe heads doing damage control and trying to combat this major uh, deal-breaking argument for their theory in terms of the infinite space allegedly being adjacent to our pressurized environment. And so again, they'll say, oh, well, you have a pressure gradient, so it's not actually a pressurized environment adjacent to a vacuum. It's a pressurized environment adjacent to a slightly lower pressure adjacent to a slightly lower pressure. But it's a false equivalency. Again, if you're 1 foot deep in the water, the pressure is not going to be all that great in terms of water pressure, and the further you go down towards the ground, in reality, the higher the pressure goes. Now, in relation to that, if you were to decrease the barometric pressure substantially, the boiling point of water decreases. So if you were to substantially decrease the barometric pressure, water would begin to vaporize. That vapor would then repressurize the environment, and an equilibrium would be formed yet again. As long as the barometric pressure is sufficient to keep the water in a liquid form, then equilibrium is reached. So if you decrease the pressure, the water would begin to boil, vaporize, and those vapors would then, in a natural Earth-like system, would then repressurize the atmosphere, and the atmospheric pressure would be sufficient yet again to contain the water in a liquid form. And the same sort of thing, I think, applies to the lower and lower density gases, which rise above the higher density gases, so like helium will rise. It's a natural order to things, which is, in a sense, the behavior of fluid dynamics. When you have a system, a large enough system, and you have a downward tendency for all objects and gases to tend towards. And so the lower density gases like helium are essentially supported by the higher density gases below them. Much like the higher density gases towards the ground are supported by the ground itself or the water beneath the pressurized system. But at the end of the day, when you get up high enough in the globe theory, at some point you reach what's called the Kármán line. It's a theoretical point in space where you're no longer in the Earth's atmosphere and you are now in quote-unquote space. Once you reach that Kármán line, hypothetical point, then you simply can't have gravity latching on to disparate molecules of gases, hundreds or maybe thousands, I don't know, way the hell up there, especially when there's supposedly a near perfect vacuum right there, for crying out loud. Gravity supposedly gets weaker the higher up you get, and the relationship between disparate sparse molecules of gases in the Earth, there wouldn't be enough gravity to keep them from expanding infinitely to find equilibrium in the infinite vacuum. The closer you get in a fluid, and yes, the atmosphere behaves like a fluid, towards the ground in a large enough sample, pressure is going to increase. That's just the way that it is. It doesn't prove gravity. It proves that there is a tendency for down to be down and up to be up. And that tendency is, gravity is a theory to explain that reality. Okay, so you can't point to the reality and say that it proves the theory that was crafted to explain that reality hypothetically. Um, Gravity is so absurd because if you measure the Earth for curvature, for one example, there is none, and so the Earth couldn't be curving space-time. And of course, space-time is yet another theory which begs to be proven. The Earth is flat, always has been, and there's a tendency for objects to fall towards the ground. We don't need to explain why that happens for the Earth to be flat. Just as we don't need to explain why there's a density gradient of atmosphere for the Earth to be flat. Again, globe earthers will say, oh, it's because of gravity, and that proves gravity, but the fact that your theory needs something like gravity does not prove gravity, and that's all that this does. So you can't point to a hypothetical which begs to be proven and actually has been debunked. You can't point to that hypothetical thing and say that it solves this problem with there being a pressure gradient. So again, the higher density air towards the ground is the natural order of things because there is a tendency for down to be down. That's it. That's all that means. And you can't point to the theory of gravity to say that down is down because of gravity, therefore gravity is proven. It's the same thing as, say, dropping a pen, releasing a pen or an apple from a tree and watching it fall to the ground and saying, see, that proves gravity. No. Gravity is a theory that is a demonstration of what goes up must come down. Gravity is a theory to explain what goes up must come down. And so you can't point to the original observation as proof of the theory that is crafted to explain that observation. So with that, just wanted to make this short video because I'm hearing more and more of this argument, and I'm just tired of it. The globe Earth trolls point to this argument and have a tone of like a gotcha moment, but it doesn't. It really does not prove anything, and it is, I believe, disingenuous of them to use this argument, because anyone who thinks about this for 10 seconds could absolutely not come to the conclusion that because we have a pressure gradient, then it all works out, right? It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Take it easy, guys. Thanks for watching. God bless, and I'll see you real soon.